Hello Guardians, ISO here. Out of the three playable races of humanity, we have humans, whose ancestors rose from Earth to build an age of miracles, Awoken, humans that were altered in deep space and changed by the cosmos, and finally the Exo. But what exactly are the Exo? Before we talk about the Exo, we need to talk about Clovis Bray I, the founder of Braytech. Clovis was, of course, a genius, and his advancements in science are known even to this day after his research company fell victim to the collapse. He knew that his creations would go on for centuries to protect and inspire, but there was one thing he could never change about himself: his mortality. You must understand, though, Clovis was not the type of man to fear death. No, he feared what would happen to his legacy in his absence. He knew that his children would take over after he passed away, and the thought of someone else taking his work and potentially twisting it into something completely different kept him up at night. The following comes from Clovis I's personal journal, known as the Mysterious Logbook. My son was the one to formulate the famous two-sentence summary of my book. Most of our energy should be spent in support of the things that are most like us. This is the only true responsibility of any living thing. And the slightly less famous addendum: the best way to spend energy is on things that make more things like us. Children are viral replicators of our ideas, but there is a certain terror about them. They alter our legacy, mutate it. What if my children decide on some key amendment, some inevitable change, which makes my legacy no longer mine? How can I be reborn through the eternal recurrence of my life logic if what my children pass down is the logic of some other Clovis, some flawed copy? Just as Clovis II was a flawed image of me. He begun work on the ExoMind project, a way to create a durable synthetic housing into which one could upload a human consciousness. This would grant him, as well as many others, the immortality he craved. Clovis was not foolish enough to test the technology himself, and the first versions of ExoMinds turned out to be failures. They fell victim to a degenerative process called the loop billboard crash cycle, in which they would adopt abnormal repetitive behaviors, exhibit slow and involuntary writhing movements of their limbs, and gradually, loss of sapience. The Exo would be indistinguishable from others, but would have no consciousness or sentience. This event claimed the life of his son, Clovis Bray II, who was uploaded into an ExoMind to flee a fatal case of prion insomnia. But eventually, Clovis I discovered something amazing: the K1 anomaly. It was unearthed in a lunar expedition, and we're unsure of its true power or purpose, but we know it's associated with the darkness. Its dark power would cause insomnia, narcolepsy, nightmares, and hallucinations to any that stayed too close to it. Clovis saw the darkness, but gave it a different name: Clarity. He communed with the artifact, which looked into his mind and saw his desire, his need for immortality, and it whispered to him a single word: Europa. Clovis was nearing the end of his life, so he quickly embarked on an expedition to Europa, asking his granddaughter Elizabeth to join him. After all, she was a senior researcher at his company. While there, he gave strange orders, following gut instincts and feelings. He led expeditions through snowstorms with no heading, only ever claiming that it was just a little further, and that clarity was guiding him. Eventually, he found his salvation. He called it Clarity Control. A huge cloak hanging in midair, as if draping a large invisible figure. The veil appears to even be flowing, perhaps breathing. Clarity Control, or perhaps the event under the cloak, spoke to him, instructing him to build a Vex gate. After performing a raid on a rival scientific organization called the Ishtar Collective, he had the parts delivered to Europa so he could create his gate, which he called the Glassway. The Glassway led him to a different solar system called the Forge Star, one in which the Vex had deconstructed every planet at an atomic level and converted them into large particle accelerators, satellites, and other megastructures. Covert research was held there, and eventually Clovis discovered the secret he'd been following for almost a century. Eureka. The Vex radiolarian fluid is obviously too virulent for use in exomines, but if exposed to clarity, the Vex patterns break down, and the fluid takes on some of the properties of clarity itself, namely its reductive effect. Introducing a tiny alicate of this reified clarity into an exomine solves the loop billboard crash cycle. As far as I can tell, permanently. The combination of Vex fluid and clarity is the key to cybernetic immortality. Speculation. The interaction of clarity, with its caustic anti-structural properties, and the Vex mind fluid, with its highly physicalized and asymbolic architecture, creates a physicalized algorithm that can serve as a random seed for the knockouts required to sustain a viable exomind. I uploaded a connectome from my library into an exobody head, treated with the Clarity Vex preparation. A full deconstructive scan of an aging Georgian volunteer, one Mr. Adai Zook. I think he believes he's in a nightmare. Fear not, Mr. Zook, I would never mistreat the beginning of something so wonderful. You will be the first of many. They shall march out of this European laboratory and sweep away every infirmity, every disease, every loss, until all humanity rests in the loving permanence of my exobodies, and all the future will look to me in humble gratitude. The problem, of course, is that we are going to need more Vex fluid. With his new combination of clarity and Vex radiolarian fluid, which he dubbed Alkahest, he was able to solve the loop billboard crash problem that early Exo were affected by. But another problem arose. Infuriating. With 12 Alkahest-seeded Exos now online, I find myself breached on the shoals of another serious problem. Not a transitional trauma, after all. Not a temporary ailment. Quite fatal. Mr. Zook was first to succumb. He continued to insist that he was living in a nightmare. He complained of hunger, of thirst, of breathlessness, of a rot in his bowels. I became concerned that he was billboarding, but his exoneuron activity remained healthy. Shortly after, Mr. Zook developed a full-blown Cotard delusion. I found him trying to chisel his face off with a table shim. He insisted that his true face was covered with a thick layer of keratin. Toenail was his exact word. And that the rest of his body was already dead and rotting. He became violent. I had to paralyze his motor functions for diagnosis. Soon Mr. Zook's fear and panic were simply too much for him to bear. He retreated into catatonia. Then he crashed. Oh, I still have the connectome scan I used to make him. That Mr. Zook can live again. But the Zook who evolved over the past several weeks, the Zook I had so many endearing arguments with, is lost. This was called dissociative exomind rejection, or DER. This cognitive disorder eventually led to death. Like a host body failing to accept a donated organ, all Exos eventually fall victim to this, as human minds find tremendous difficulty reconciling their presence in a new metal body. They found that if an Exo happened to fall victim to DER, a reboot, also called a reset or a memory wipe, would stave off its effects. The memories of the old body were forgotten so that the mind could better accept the new one. Even though it's sometimes called a memory wipe, memories were stored in too complex a fashion to be easily located and deleted, so associative access to them is blocked, which leads to a sort of amnesia similar to being born again. Research was carried out, and DER was able to be pushed back so that it took an entire lifetime for its effects to develop. But develop they did, and multiple resets were deemed acceptable. Most Exo have a number on the tail end of their name, which represents which version of you actually are. For example, a human named Micah would be referenced to as Micah 0. After being uploaded into an exomind, however, they would be Micah 1. After experiencing their first reboot, they would be Micah 2, and so forth. This name was stored in their memory as hardware, so they wouldn't ever forget the correct number. The ability to reset was implanted into every Exo as a reflex instinct, so that it would happen immediately at the onset of DER. Clovis Bray even founded a colony on Europa called Eventide, which would house clients awaiting uploading, as well as the resulting Exos. The Deepstone Crypt would provide their bodies, a giant research and manufacturing center built by Clovis around Clarity Control. Exo eventually spread throughout the solar system, living as a completely normal, albeit rare, subtype of humanity. When the collapse occurred, the Exo's memories were shattered, and nearly all knowledge of their origins were lost as well. Some dead Exo were even found by ghosts, and reborn as risen thanks to the light of the Traveler. But the memories of their original creation were all but completely forgotten. The Deepstone Crypt remains now as only a strange reoccurring dream in the back of the mind of every Exo. The following comes from a Destiny 1 grimoire card called Ghost Fragment: Legends.
This is the tower where we were born. Not the tower, just a tower in a dream. The tower stands on a black plain. Behind the tower is a notch in the mountains where the sun sets. The teeth of the mountain cut the sun into fractal shapes, and the light that comes down at evening paints synapse shapes on the ground. Usually it's evening when we come. The ground is fertile. This is good land. We go to the tower in dreams, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Some of us go to the tower in peace. They walk through a field of golden millet, and a low, warm wind blows in from their back. I don't know why this is, because the rest of us meet an army. You can ask others about Deepstone, and they'll tell you about the army. They might confess one truth, which is this: we have to kill the army to get to the tower. Usually this starts barehanded. Somewhere along the way you take a weapon. Ask again, and if they're buzzed, they might also admit that most of us don't make it to the tower. Except once or twice. None of them will tell you the army is made of everyone we meet. The people we work with, and the people we see in the street, and the people we tell about our dreams. We kill them all. I think because we were made to kill, and this is the part of us that thinks about nothing else. Often I kill people I don't know, but like most of us, I think I knew them once, and this time before one reset or another, when my mind was younger and less terribly scarred. So this is how we go back to the Deepstone Crypt, where we were born.
So that is the story of the Exomind project. That is their origin story, and that is the collection of small truths that we're still left with. That is what it means to be an Exo. Thank you for joining me today. My statistics tell me that about 30% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, so remember to subscribe if you haven't already. The best way to let me know you enjoy my content is to leave a like on the video or a comment down below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.